What's up guys? Today we are talking about the bass, and I'm gonna run you through how I get it all set up, how I record, how I do my track cleanup, how I do time correction, which plugins I use, and how I automate everything. Okay, so don't forget to check out my new album, The Dichotomy Paradox. Let's get at it. So the first thing I do is put new strings on if it needs it, and I make sure the action is still set up the way I like it. And then I'll wipe the bass down and get as much grime off as I can. And finally, I'll make sure the electronic components are as dust-free as possible. The next thing I do is tune my bass the best I can. I like to use Mogami cables, and I have a rack tuner that I prefer. And after it's all tuned up, I'll go ahead and plug it directly into my preamp, which is an ADL 600. Once I have my gain set up just right, what I'll do is mess with the tone knobs on the bass itself to see if I can get a better sound. And that's it. All I gotta do now is set up a track and make sure it's leveled, and then I set up a loop over the section I want to record, and that's it. Let's go for it. So after that, I repeat the process. I set up another track, I label it bass, and I set my loop over the next section of the song I want to record, and that's it. I do the exact same thing again. So imagine for a second all the sections have been recorded. What I would do is zoom up to where they overlap one another. Okay, and then I would cut them both right on the downbeat. Okay, and I'd erase the leftover stuff, line them all up on the exact same track, and then I'd go ahead and put a crossfade between them. You could also keep recording on the same track. And then after that, you'd have to comp everything together, which is basically the same thing of what I just did. Okay, now I personally prefer to just have two tracks and alternately record on them as opposed to recording on one track and then comping everything. Now, of course, if you're working on a song that's pretty short and fairly simple, it's probably best to just record the entire song in one take. And just like we talked about in the drum tutorials, you could do a couple takes and do some comping if there were some mistakes. After the tracks have been recorded, cut, and put on the same track, I like to add crossfades between every single cut. It's also good to zoom in close and make sure the downbeat isn't being cut off, and make sure everything looks okay when you zoom up close between those crossfades. And of course, you can solo the bass track and listen through all those cuts and make sure they sound okay. Now I'm also going to add a fade in at the beginning and make sure that that's not being cut off. That looks okay. And I'll make a fade out as well. And I'll zoom up and make sure that that's looking okay. And you can see we could kind of trim up some of that dead space there. And then I would do the exact same thing. You got this other section here. Put a fade in, put a fade out. What this does is help ensure that there's no pops or clicks, because the next thing I'm going to do is glue it all together so there are no more cuts. And for this album, I went for a 2-track trick, which involves having the original bass track with some of the highs cut out, and then a duplicated track that we're going to name Bass Dirty, and that has basically no low end and some distortion, and that's going to be our dirt. And we're going to blend these 2 tracks together. So I'll copy the original track down to the dirty track, line it up, okay? And also in the mixer, we're going to go ahead and group those together. Okay, in group settings, it's labeled bass. We want to make sure editing selection is on if we want to time correct later. Okay, check any parameters that we need. And from this point, we're pretty much set up. We can start time correcting a little bit. Let's talk about that next. So time correction is one of those things you have to be really subtle with. And I only use time correction on the drums and the bass. I just try and line the bass up with the kick or the kick up with the bass, and only in the areas that really stick out. Another very important thing that I use it for is when I play something out of time. And I'll do my best to play out of time with all the different instruments and line them up, but usually a little bit of time correction can help. So here is a transition that goes out of time. I've got the drums and the bass soloed. I'm going to play it without the metronome and then with the metronome. And I want you to hear what I'm talking about and how it'd be hard to line this up while recording. So it's not like it's way off, but a little bit of time correction could really tighten things up. So what I'm going to do is zoom in to the hits the drums are doing. You can see there's an octobon hit there. There's another octobon hit, and I'm looking down here at the bass track, and I can see that it needs to be lined up a little bit. You can just look at the transients of the drum and the bass. And you'll notice I have everything hidden except for the drums and the bass, which makes it easy to view all at once. Say, here's another hit. Line that up. Kind of going across. You can see this one's way off. Line that guy up. Okay, one's off just a smidge. Just a little bit. See, they're all off just a little bit, and it actually didn't sound that bad, but let's hear what it sounds like when it's all tightened up a bit. And actually, there's one more hit. There's a kick at the very end. We'll have to kind of scroll up to find it. There it is. Okay. We'll use the little ruler as our guide. Make sure that that's lined up. Do a little bit better job. There we go. All right. So now it's lined up with the drums. Now let's hear the difference. See if you can tell if it's tighter. So in this case, I think that's an improvement. On the original bass track, I'm using a standard channel strip. And you can see I've boosted a couple things. And the gain reduction's pretty consistent at -6 dB. Now I'm going to go ahead and play this loop and explain what the dirty track is doing while we listen. One of the great things about having a clean track and a dirty track is you can automate them independent of each other. In this example, you can see the dirty track is down a little bit in the pre-chorus, and then when it comes up to the verse, it pops back up, giving it a little extra grunge. Let's check that out. That's a great way to add a subtle dynamic with the bass between different sections. Now I realize that was probably a little hard to hear depending on what you're listening to, but you get the concept. Now in this next example, there were some syncopated hits that I played a little bit too hard, which made them kind of clanky sounding. And so I automated the dirty track to come down right at those hits, which helped soften things up. So that's a quick run through of how I record the bass. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is how I record the guitars, which is my favorite thing to do. So don't forget to subscribe and definitely check out my website, thoughtsofmine.com.